Imagine you're going down to the bottom of the Mariana Trench in a full military diving suit. You might think all you'd see are some tiny creatures or just straight darkness. But what would actually happen is your lungs would implode before you even reach the bottom. You're cooked. The pressure in the Mariana Trench is the highest in the entire world, more than 1,000 times. The pressure at the surface, even the most advanced military-grade diving suit would stand absolutely no chance of saving you from collapsing in on yourself. So logically, it would seem that nothing could possibly survive down here, right? But if you know anything about the horrors of the deep ocean, you already know that this isn't the case. In fact, most of the deep ocean doesn't just contain life, it hosts some of the most gigantic life forms on Earth. Massive sharks that were alive during Isaac Newton's time, squids larger than buses, and countless other real-world examples of deep-sea gigantism that feel almost unreal. But the Mariana Trench isn't just deep ocean. It's the deepest point on the entire planet. So, what actually exists all the way down there? To understand the Mariana Trench, we first need to look at where it even begins. The Mariana Trench reaches roughly 10,984 meters deep, measured from the ocean's surface. However, the trench itself actually starts around 5,000 meters below sea level at what's known as the upper rim. Everything above that point is fairly normal, which makes sense since it's just open ocean above. Anything floating there, whether fish or human, would have no idea they were above the deepest place on Earth. The trench is so deep that if Mount Everest were placed upside down into the ocean, its peak would still fall about 7,000 feet short of the bottom, a place known as Challenger Deep. This location is so remote that only 22 people in all of human history have ever reached it. For comparison, more people have traveled to the moon. So, what would it take to reach the bottom? To do that, you'd have to pass through every layer of the ocean. Unfortunately, the epipelagic zone is the first layer and the only one you could even partially survive. It extends down about 200 meters, and while the upper portion is manageable, reaching the bottom of this zone is already extremely difficult. Beyond that lies the mesopelagic zone, the same depth where the deepest freedive record was set at 214 meters using only a wetsuit, and that record barely scratches the surface of this zone, which extends down to around 1,000 meters. No human free diver could ever reach its bottom. Here, pressure reaches about 100 times that of the surface, enough to kill you almost instantly. And that's only the second layer. Below that is the bathypelagic zone, starting around 1,000 meters and extending to about 4,000 meters. Ignoring the pressure that would have crushed you long ago, if you were somehow alive here, you'd be in total darkness. No light reaches this depth, the cold is extreme, and the pressure is strong enough to crush steel. And somehow, it still gets worse. As mentioned earlier, the Mariana Trench doesn't truly begin until about 5,000 meters below sea level. We haven't even reached it yet. Past the bathypelagic zone lies the abyssopelagic zone, spanning roughly 4,000 to 6,000 meters deep. This zone should be the bottom of the ocean, because for most of Earth, it actually is. But unfortunately, this is only where the trench truly begins. Pressure here exceeds 600 times that of the surface, though by now, that detail hardly matters. Near the top of this zone, you might find Stygiomedusa gigantea, a massive jellyfish, born from deep-sea gigantism. It can span over 10 meters, including its ribbon-like tentacles. Fewer than 100 sightings have been recorded in the last century, so very little is known about it. Despite its size, it's surprisingly light, estimated around 150 pounds. Unlike most jellyfish, it doesn't sting. Instead, it uses its long ribbons to slowly trap prey, much like flypaper in the deep sea. But at the very bottom of the abyssal zone lives one of the largest squids in the world. And while you might think this refers to the famous giant squid, this time it doesn't. See them at all here. The abyssal zone is, oddly enough, too deep for the giant squid, which can only reach up to mid-pelagic waters. And while you might think of the colossal squid, which does live in the upper abyssal zone, it wouldn't be found in the Mariana Trench since it sticks exclusively to Antarctic waters. What you would find here is something even stranger, the Magnapinna squid, also known as the bigfin squid. If you've seen our video on the creepiest squids, you'd already know that, at least in my opinion, this is by far the creepiest squid in the world, at least that we currently know of. While it's unlikely to be as physically dangerous as a tank-like colossal squid, it's deeply unsettling just to look at. I'm not entirely sure why its tentacles are stretched out the way they are, or why it sometimes just hovers motionless. And honestly, most marine biologists don't fully understand it either. These squids live so deep and are so unbelievably rare that we can't properly study them. Most of what we know comes from juveniles. They can stretch about 25 feet long with those strange elbowed arms that simply hang beneath them. The most likely explanation is that they use them to catch smaller organisms drifting past, but no live adult specimen has ever been captured. They inhabit depths so extreme that they can even reach the upper hadal zone, an environment that's usually too deadly for most squids. And yes, this creature is yet another example of deep-sea gigantism. But gigantism doesn't just affect large animals, it also transforms smaller ones. Take the giant isopod, for example. It's part of the same family as ordinary pill bugs, but instead of being a few millimeters long, they can grow close to 20 inches across. Small compared to humans, sure, but massive. For an isopod, they're usually found near the upper abyssal zone, and while it might seem possible for them to venture deeper into the hadal zone, it's not very likely. There's little benefit in doing so because the hadal zone is probably the worst place to live on Earth. This region is so remote that it doesn't even exist across most of the ocean, only within deep-sea trenches, including the Mariana Trench. It stretches from around 6,000 meters all the way down to 11,000 meters. The only reason it doesn't go deeper is because Challenger Deep is already the lowest point on the planet. The pressure here exceeds 1,000 times that at sea level. Normally I'd give some wild comparison, but it's honestly impossible to imagine what it's like to have the weight of an adult African elephant pressing down on every single square inch of your body. You might expect to find the most extreme giants down here, but that's not what happens. The hadal zone is so hostile that deep-sea gigantism actually begins to reach its limit. Organisms grow larger and larger until they simply can't anymore. The more body mass you have, the more pressure is crushing every square inch of it. Smaller organisms handle this better because they have less surface area for pressure to act on and fewer internal systems that can fail. And more importantly, there's barely any food down here. At a certain point, there's just not enough energy to support large bodies. It's strange to think, and many channels don't cover this because they like to emphasize gigantism, but the hadal zone is essentially where deep-sea gigantism ends and where the deepest shrinking begins. Animals don't grow infinitely large, and while it's possible, there are undiscovered squids larger than giant squids elsewhere in the ocean, it's extremely unlikely they live in the deeper hadal zone. It's simply too deep. So, what actually lives here? One of the most well-known examples is the Mariana snailfish, the deepest living fish ever discovered. Despite the name, it's not a snail, it's a fish. It's small, almost translucent, with no scales and a body so soft it would collapse under surface pressure. But down here that jelly-like body is perfect. It bends instead of breaking, allowing it to survive at depths greater than 8,000 meters. They can still grow to about a foot long. There are amphipods too, shrimp-like, crustaceans that can survive all the way down to Challenger deep. Some have special proteins that prevent their cell membranes from collapsing under pressure. Others have even been found eating bits of plastic that somehow made it all the way down here. There are also xenophyophores, giant, single-celled organisms that live directly on the trench floor. They can grow up to 4 inches wide, making them some of the largest single cells on Earth. Strangely enough, xenophyophores may be crucial to life down here. They create tiny microhabitats from sand and minerals, providing shelter for other small organisms in an otherwise barren environment. So even though they're single-celled, they function like ecosystem builders in the deepest trenches. Not quite as dramatic as giant squids, but at these depths, you don't get much better. Organic dust falling from above. Life in the Hadal Zone isn't some dramatic realm of giant monsters fighting beneath the water. It's far more brutal than that. You either barely survive or you don't survive at all. And that's exactly why the Abyssal Zone is my favorite, because that's where most of the truly strange and fascinating creatures still exist. So, where else does the Hadal Zone exist besides the Mariana Trench? The Hadal Zone usually forms when the abyssal plain cracks open due to immense tectonic activity, creating deep ocean trenches. Like the Mariana Trench, there are around 20 major ocean trenches on Earth, most of them located in the Pacific Ocean. Some of the most well-known include the Tonga Trench, the Philippine Trench, and, of course, the Mariana Trench. But if simply existing down there is almost a death sentence, how do we even know what lives there? The short answer is we barely do. The only reason we know anything at all about the Hadal Zone is because of a handful of extremely rare and incredibly difficult missions. These missions require the most advanced submarines ever built and people brave enough to actually climb inside them. Most submarines can't even come close to reaching the bottom of the Mariana Trench. Even advanced military submarines, including nuclear attack subs, usually max out at around 600 meters. You're not getting anywhere near 6,000 meters, let alone 11,000. The submersibles capable of reaching these depths are essentially pressure-proof capsules built for one purpose only: survival. The first humans to ever reach the bottom were Jacques Picard and Don Walsh in 1960 inside a submersible called the Trieste. Imagine being inside a steel sphere barely large enough for 2 people, lowered nearly 11 kilometers into total darkness, relying on 1960s technology and hoping nothing fails. At around 10,900 meters deep, one of their outer windows cracked under the pressure, which personally would have terrified me. Somehow they kept going. They stayed at the bottom for about 20 minutes before beginning the long, silent ascent back to the surface, probably staring at that crack the entire time. After that, no one returned for more than 50 years, and honestly, it's not hard to understand why. The next major descent didn't happen until 2012, when James Cameron, the same person who directed Titanic and Avatar, piloted a one-man sub called the Deep Sea Challenger. Not the most original name, but it made him the first person to reach Challenger deep solo. His vessel was shaped like a vertical torpedo, covered in bright green plating and designed specifically to go deep. Cameron described the bottom as a completely alien world, flat, desolate, and covered in fine sediment that looked like gray powder. There were no signs of large animals, which fits perfectly with the idea that deep-sea gigantism ends at these depths. In 2019, Victor Vescovo broke the depth. Record again using his submersible, the DSV limiting factor reaching nearly 10,928 meters. That's only about 20 meters deeper than Cameron's dive, but a record is a record. Unlike earlier missions, his goal wasn't just a touch the bottom and leave. He spent hours mapping the seafloor and documenting some of the most extreme life ever filmed. Once again, plastic waste was found even at the very bottom of the ocean. Most of what we know today doesn't come from humans traveling down there at all. It comes from remotely operated vehicles and deep-sea landers. Scientists lower them into trenches where they sink for hours before finally reaching the bottom. These machines carry cameras, sensors, bait traps, and sometimes robotic arms for collecting samples. Their pressure-resistant housings are made from titanium and thick glass. If they fail, they implode instantly. And even with all that technology, success is far from guaranteed. The trenches are pitch black, freezing cold, and filled with fine sediment that instantly clouds the water when disturbed. Most footage is grainy, shaky, and only lasts a few minutes, but it's enough to show that the Hadal Zone isn't completely lifeless. Almost every new mission reveals something unexpected simply because it's so difficult to observe anything at all down there. But so far, no massive supergiants have been discovered in the Hadal Zone, and for anyone hoping for giant sea monsters, there probably never will be. Trenches like the Mariana Trench aren't really meant to represent the deep ocean. They are the deepest parts of the ocean, places so extreme they only exist because of Earth's tectonic forces. They weren't created to hold monsters of the abyss. They only hold whatever can endure. Imagine a place so deep, so distant, that sunlight has never touched it. A place where the ocean presses down with a force strong enough to crush steel, silence sound, and erase almost everything that dares to exist. This is not science fiction. This is the deepest place on Earth. This is the Mariana Trench. For most of human history, the deep ocean was nothing more than a black void on the map. Sailors crossed its surface without ever knowing what waited beneath them. Even today, more people have walked on the moon than have visited the bottom of this trench. And there is a reason for that. Because the ocean does not forgive curiosity. At the surface, the sea feels calm. Waves roll gently. Light dances across the water. Fish move freely. But as you descend, everything changes. The blue fades to darkness. Temperature drops. Pressure begins to rise, slowly at first, then relentlessly. By the time you reach a few thousand meters, the ocean is no longer a place made for humans. It is a place made for survivors. Layer by layer, the ocean transforms. Near the top, life is familiar: fish, plankton, and creatures shaped by light. Below that, shadows dominate. Eyes grow larger. Bodies glow faintly with bioluminescence, creating brief flashes of blue and green in the black water. Down here, light is no longer a gift from the sun. It is something you must make yourself. Deeper still, even that glow begins to fade. By the time you approach the abyss, the ocean becomes quiet in a way that feels unnatural. No currents, no waves, just cold, crushing stillness. This is where pressure becomes a constant threat, squeezing every inch of matter with hundreds of times the force felt at sea level. Metal bends, glass shatters, bones would collapse instantly, and yet life continues. Strange creatures drift through the darkness, jellyfish the size of rooms, squids with arms that trail endlessly beneath them, and scavengers that move slowly, conserving every ounce of energy. Food is scarce here. Nothing grows. Everything feeds on what falls from above, tiny flakes of dead plankton, waste, and decay, drifting down like underwater snow. But even this is not the bottom. The Mariana Trench begins where the abyss ends. The seafloor cracks open, plunging downward into a wound in the Earth's crust. This is the Hadal Zone, a realm so extreme that even deep-sea giants begin to disappear. Here, size is no longer